Welcome to Mind Overboard. In this video, we're going to spend a brief amount of time examining a humorous recent addition to the abortion debate. Bill Maher recently had Representative Katie Porter on his show. In the course of a discussion about reproductive rights, he decided to get deep and pondered what it would be like had the world been deprived of his existence.
They told my mother, after my sister, very difficult birth, she shouldn't have another one.
Katie Porter was more than willing to play ball and had a ready reply.
Your mom made her choice.
Yes.
And we're all here.
Yeah.
With the consequences of that choice.
Requiring old Bill to eat shit. Of course, he was mostly shit upon as a result of overtly demonstrating his offense to her response.
I'm not arguing what you're pretending I'm arguing for, all of you on this panel, and you asshole.
He could have just as easily brushed it off and moved on. This was a very strange reaction from someone who built a career in comedy based on crass, pejorative jokes. Also, while the setup and execution was flawless, it was a fairly predictable joke. At any rate, I think it's important to dive a little deeper here, because Bill purports to maintain liberal values, so he presumably supports a woman's right to choose. However, if we start scrutinizing our own mortality and the consequences of what things would have been like had we failed to exist, then the conversation has the potential to devolve into an infinite regression. If we begin to examine our feelings about the possibility of never existing, this line of questioning is not only available to every person who has been born, it can also be seen as a defense of every potential person who never was. This leaves us wondering whether Bill's concerns represent a reasonable consideration in our ongoing conversation about reproductive rights. First off, this is an incredibly self-serving argument. Just as none of us knows what it would actually be like to not exist, none of us would lament losing the opportunity to grasp the chance once given. The fear and uncertainty from thinking about this is derived from being faced with exploring what it would feel like to lose everything, but you can't lose what you don't have. More specifically, you can't suffer losing something you've not only never had, but also never knew about and therefore couldn't even imagine. At its core, this is not dissimilar to the common midlife crisis many go through, in which we despair to think of the impact our lives will have on the world, whether we've done or accomplished anything of substance, and how we will be remembered. The unfortunate and pessimistic truth is that for 99% of us, the memory of our existence will eventually fade completely. Civilization will go on not without caring, but without recognizing that we existed at all. This is likely also the case for Bill Maher, even despite the significance of his media presence, which doesn't bode well for the rest of us who have likely never created something that has been woven into our cultural fabric. Recognizing this reality, it's sad to extend this pathos retroactively to the time before we had the privilege of being born. As if it weren't bad enough to wallow in this now, we feel the need to amplify our sufferings by creating circumstances in our minds that fully exculpate us from history, robbing the world of the blessing of our presence. How dramatic. The reality is that none of this matters in terms of reproductive rights and should not be a compelling argument to any serious person. It's false to think that every human being who could exist should exist or has the right to exist. This viewpoint is not feasible from the standpoint of ongoing resource sustainability, nor is it biologically possible. Sperm outnumber eggs by millions to one. Our evolutionary success stems partially from the inherent tension that arises between excess and scarcity. Moving beyond the biological, there are also a lot of arbitrary variables that have to be just so to result in your particular birth. Up for review would be questions like, what if they had used contraception? What if she chose not to have intercourse with your father, or vice versa? What if they just didn't have intercourse during the short window of ovulation? What if she was already pregnant when your time came? What if this preemptive pregnancy was a result of prior contraception that had failed? And so on forever. It's only by extreme happenstance that the particular egg in question was on offer that month, and at just the right time to receive the other half of your genetic code. But we don't really even have the right to think of it in those terms. Ignore all other questions because that wasn't even your egg to begin with. It was equally on offer to millions of your potential competitors at the moment that half of you managed to beat them out. That initiated the first of a multitude of unfolding pathways and overlapping biological processes that had to go just right to get to your genesis, ignoring postnatal development completely. We deem this a triumph without any concern for the masses of unutilized potential that is represented by every successful pregnancy. Our existence is balanced precariously on a knife's edge in more ways than we ever acknowledge, both collectively and individually. With that said, it's not entirely unreasonable to think about these things. The question is whether or not it's a productive avenue of conversation for the broader topic. The answer appears to be that it clearly is not. Because of this, it represents a distraction. It's a line of thinking that guides us away from the core issues around which we must find common ground. If we treat it as substantive, it could result in an essentially endless delay in making any sort of progress due to its universal applicability and regressive nature. Ultimately, the question is fatuous, and it doesn't help to approach the discussion of important issues like reproductive rights, with all its already inherent variability, from a perspective of our own selfish desires. We shouldn't let our hubris distract us from a productive conversation, which is why Katie Porter's ego check response was perfect. It brought him back to earth while emphasizing the limitations of that line of reasoning, by calling into question his own sense of self-importance, which prevented them from being sidetracked. I just wish it didn't hurt his feelings so badly. What do you think about it? I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments below and become a part of the channel by subscribing. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.